Hello, and thanks for joining us today. Look, one of the most important things in any business is culture. And I can go on and on and on about the importance of that. I can tell you that we kind of hire and fire people, unfortunately, sometimes because of core values, because of the culture that we've established, and whether people are a good fit there or they're not. And the interesting thing is that I've learned that's even more important than skill set. Like we'll hire people for cultural fit well above skill set. And as a result, like our turnover has been, I don't know, really low through the lifetime of our company. But I can go on and on about culture. That there's so many things important, and this drives the success of any business. So I wanted to dive into it today. And on this topic, I brought in the foremost expert, David Friedman. Now, he's actually an award-winning CEO, entrepreneur, author, and renowned public speaker as well. In 2011, he published his first book, Fundamentally Different, which is based on the insights he learned and taught through his leadership career. And in 2018, he published his second book, Culture by Design, the definitive how-to manual for building a high-performance culture. Now, his current company, High Performance Culture, has helped hundreds of companies throughout North America to implement his culture operating system, CultureWise. David, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Ty. Great to be with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited you're here. And I said this before we fired this up, that, the cool thing about being a host is getting to talk to people like you that have really interesting topics. And this is probably one of the most interesting I've covered in a long time. But why do you think that culture is so important to an organization?
Well, Ty, when you think about, if you're a leader and you think about all the different things you can do to work on your company and make your company more successful, I don't think there's a single thing you can do, a single lever you can pull that has more influence over more parts of your organization than working on your culture. I mean, you think about it, you mentioned that it's a big part of your ability to attract the kind of people you want and to retain those people, to reduce that turnover. It affects your ability it affects how productive your people are. It affects how innovative they are. It affects how they work together as teammates. It affects the customer service they deliver. It affects how much money you make. It affects every part of your company. And so again, you think about, if you want to build a great company, what could you possibly touch on that would have more impact on more aspects of your organization than the culture the people are operating in? It's everything.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me is that it is now when I see that. But in the beginning, this is where I think I'm confused is, do we create the culture, or was the culture created? Because when I came in and started this, we've got going on 80 employees, right? Or team members. So when I look at that, we never really had a culture or core values or anything when we started. But then we kind of started, after 20 people or so, started to realize that culture and those values was kind of being established within the team. So I've always wondered that, is this something you have to really be intentional about from the beginning? Or is it something that's kind of developed naturally as the organization grows?
That's a great question, Ty. And the answer is both. And what I mean by that is, I would tell you that if you don't create it intentionally, it's going to get created anyway. So here's my observation. Every group of people that comes together, whether we're talking about a company or a sports team or a group of friends or a family, that you put human beings together and a culture is going to form. It is. Whether it's what you want it to be or not, it's a different question, but it's going to form. And what happens in most organizations, or let's just say take any groups of people, even a group of friends of yours, that your group of friends has a culture, a way that you do things. And what happens is that if you're not purposely doing something about it, the culture in any group is mostly influenced by those people who just happen to have the strongest personalities. So in every group of people, think about your friends, or any of your audience, think about the friends as you're listening to this, that in your group of friends, you've got certain people who are more influential than others. They're the ones that we're trying to decide what time to have dinner tonight. And somebody says, hey, you guys want to meet at 6? You're like, who said 6? Somebody stepped up and said, let's do this. And everybody else follows suit. So these stronger personalities influence the norms of the group in a disproportionate kind of way. Now, the reason that this is important for your listeners to understand, and for you to understand for that matter, is that if you're not purposely doing something about it, that exact same dynamic is going on in your company. So when you weren't intentional about it, your culture was getting formed. It was just organically, and it was mostly being influenced by the strongest personalities. And those strongest personalities aren't necessarily the designated managers, supervisors, and leaders. They're just the people who happen to have strong personalities. And if those people happen to be really positive, enthusiastic, hardworking, quality-oriented kind of people, shoot, this will be great. Everything will work out fine. But what if it's not? What if some of those strong personalities happen to be cynical jerks with lousy attitudes? And we've all had jerks in our companies. You've had them. Those jerks are going to influence the people around them to be more like them. And the reason, again, this is obvious and important, is if we understand how much influence your culture has over your success as a company, geez, why would I leave that to the whims of the personalities and just hope it's going to work out? I better, as a leader, take control over that and purposely make my culture be what I want it to be. And that's the real point. That's important to understand.
So true too. And what's interesting is I've seen subcultures, I'm sure you have too, be
Mhm.
created within teams, and
Yeah.
then it'd be a nasty subculture. And I've even had a
Yeah.
team where we had to disband the team because we could not turn it around and fix it because of
Yeah.
exactly what you're describing. The people that had the strongest personalities in that team, now that I think back, right, like they were the ones that were taking it down a bad path, and everybody
Yeah.
ended up going with them. So how do you do this? How do you fix? How do you intentionally come into an organization to create culture?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And let me preface the answer to that, Ty, by saying that most leaders have never thought about culture as being a process or a system. They think of it as just this like soft, squishy, I'll sprinkle pixie dust on my people and somehow magically it'll all be wonderful. But my point of view is that we should be as systematic about our culture as we are about our sales or our finances or operations or any other part of our company that drives success. So the answer to your question, how do we do that? So I organize the steps that it takes to be really intentional about the culture, really systematic around a framework that I call the 8-step framework. 8 different things. You do these 8 things, this is how you pull this off. And while all of these 8 steps are important, ultimately, when you boil it all down, there are 2 steps that drive probably 80 or 90% of the impact for organizations. And those 2 steps are, number one, how we go about defining exactly what we want our culture to be. And I'll share with you in just a moment how to do that. And number 2, a concept that I call creating rituals. So let me sort of unpack those for your audience. So the first step in really creating a culture in an intentional way is to define with tremendous clarity exactly what you want that culture to be. Now, that sounds pretty obvious, and it is, because how could you possibly purposely create the culture if you don't know what the heck you're trying to create in the first place? And yet, as obvious as that sounds, my observation is that very few leaders and very few companies do this well. To do that, I make a very important distinction. It's a language distinction, and this will pick up on something that you mentioned earlier. There's a big distinction between what I call values and what I call behaviors, because I think these are very different from each other. And the difference actually, it matters. It's more than just semantics. So you mentioned before, Ty, that you created some core values, and everybody's got their core values. A value to me is an abstract concept. So examples of values are things like quality, integrity, loyalty, respect, teamwork, service. These are ideas, they're notions. A behavior, in contrast, is an action. It's something that I can literally see people doing. So let me give you some examples of behaviors in my company. Some of the behaviors we teach are things like honor commitments, practice blameless problem solving, get clear on expectations, be a fanatic about response time, do what's best for the customer. These are actions that you do. So a value is an abstract idea where behavior is an action. Now, the reason that this is relevant and not just semantics is that the problem with most companies' typical looking core values is that they're so abstract that they mean different things to different people. What you mean by respect might be different than what I mean by respect. It's very difficult to coach people about their values because they're too abstract. Behaviors, because they're more action oriented, are a lot easier to teach and coach and guide and give people feedback about. They're easier to operationalize. So the first step in being systematic is to define the culture that you want, not in terms necessarily of this broad nebulous set of core values, but rather in terms of the behaviors that you say, geez, if we could get our people doing these things more consistently, we're going to kick some butt in our marketplace. And I give those behaviors a name. It's just my own nomenclature. I call these behaviors fundamentals because they're fundamental to success. So the first of these two major steps is defining in really clear terms the behaviors that drive success. Now, having that clarity is helpful, but it's not enough, because if all we do is put up a beautiful sign on the wall with behaviors, well, that's not going to make anybody doing them. We got to get our people living this stuff. And we do that through a very simple concept that I call creating rituals. So a ritual is a routine, a habit, something you do over and over. You get up in the morning, you brush your teeth. You go to a ball game, we do the national anthem. Some people, before a meal, they say a prayer. It's a routine. And the reason that rituals are important is that most people and most companies stink at sticking with things. We get all these great, wonderful ideas, and we do them for a little while, and then we forget about it, and it becomes the flavor of the month. Well, when something becomes a ritual, it's no longer difficult to do. It's just what we do. You don't struggle to remember to brush your teeth in the morning. At least I hope not. It's just part of your routine. So when it becomes a ritual, it's easy to keep going. So the way we use this very simple idea is we take these fundamentals, these behaviors, we roll it out into a company in very engaged, interactive ways, and then we begin to focus on one fundamental every week through a series of rituals. So let me give you a simple example of what I mean. In my company and all of our clients, every time we have a meeting in our company, the first agenda item of any meeting, a Zoom meeting, in-person meeting, any meeting this week is our fundamental of the week. And we spend the first few minutes talking about it. So my fundamental of the week this week is called Create Win-Win Solutions. So every time there's a meeting anywhere in my company this week, we start the meeting with a 3 or 4 minute discussion about creating win-win solutions. Next week, we do the same. We have a number of other rituals like that, but next week, every meeting starts with the next fundamental, and the week after that, the fundamental after that, and so on. And we keep cycling through them over and over and over again, so that eventually these things become internalized. So there's a lot of other things, but the core of the basic simple idea is, if we can define in really clear terms the behaviors that drive success in your company, and then we can create a structured, systematic way to teach those behaviors over and over and over again, sooner or later, they're going to become internalized. It's really that ridiculously simple. So that's a quick version of it, but that's how you get systematic and intentional about creating the culture you want, instead of hoping it's going to work out.
Any place to start, and I love that framework, by the way. We've only jumped into 2 of the 8. But like, what if you're just a brand new organization? Well, when do you do this? Do you do it right from the beginning of starting a business? Do you do it when you start to have employees? Do you do it when you have a certain number of employees? Because you know how it is. Like, when you're starting a business, this is not typically front of mind as you're getting
Yeah.
it off the ground.
Yeah. So what I would say, there's the old wise saying, I don't know who said this, but when the question is asked, when's the best time to plant a tree? And the answer is, 100 years ago. And what's the next best time? Today. I would say the same about culture, that the best time to do it is when you start your company, because you're building the foundation upon which everything else you do is going to be built. You don't have to undo all the other things you've done. That being said, 99% of us are already in our business as we're not starting. And so we are where we are. The best time to do it was yesterday. The next best time is right now. That, again, I look at this and say, there's almost nothing you could do that has more impact on every aspect of your company than your culture. So shoot, why would I wait? I got to be intentional about it. Now, I'll add one other element to this, and I think this will resonate with your growing companies, leaders in your audience. It's related to something you referred to earlier. When a company is small, think back when you started your company. You started it, right?
Yes.
So when you started your company and you had 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 people, you didn't have to think about culture. And you mentioned you didn't think about it so much. You just do what you do. You got to do business. And you don't have to be, it would be better to be intentional, but you could get away with not being so systematic, because there's only a handful of people and you're the leader and they see you every day and your example is enough to carry the day. Be like Ty, and that's good enough. You were there. They saw what you did and they just mimicked you. But as a company grows and it goes from 5 people to 10 or 20 or 50, or like you said, 80, or maybe you make an acquisition or 2, or maybe you have multiple locations, all of a sudden, I'll bet right now, your people aren't seeing you every day. There's just too many, forget the pandemic and the remote environment, but just they're not seeing you because there's enough people that you can't be seeing and touching all your people. So if we haven't found a way to be more systematic about embedding the culture we want, all of a sudden it gets lost. It gets diluted because your example isn't enough anymore. So as a company grows, this becomes more and more critical to make sure that we are not leaving this to chance, but are embedding the culture that we want right into every part of the DNA of the organization.
You know, it's interesting because when I very first started thinking about culture, it was because of this guy named Pete that we hired. And I hired the guy, he was like, he had more experience than anybody in the field that I'd ever seen. And I mean, shortly in, a month in, like my team went in my head on a platter. I never had that happen before, never had them revolt against me for any reason. And this was because he was not a culture fit. Now, we didn't have a culture established then, but that taught me a very hard lesson when I have to let him go and then settle the team down to understand culture, start to look into it. And this was the step of us starting to establish core values, although we've never done behaviors. But it's funny because when I think back at that time, the core values that we started to create were all everything he did. Like we went the opposite of like, you know, we got to be honest. We got to work as team players. But the reason I bring this up is that how do you do that? Because your behaviors are articulated beautifully. Like, I mean, even though I think I'm proud of our core values, when I hear your behaviors, I'm like, wow, that is like beautiful. But how do you do that? Like, how does a normal person starting a business get any kind of idea of the values or behaviors they really even want to adopt?
Yeah, it's a great question. So here's what I would say. So the first thing, and notice as you did that when you think about your core values versus my behaviors, what makes them so much more powerful is that they simply bring more clarity to what you're expecting. That the core values sound good, but because they mean too many different things, they don't bring the same degree of clarity. And that's what our people need and want is, I just want to be clear what you expect of me. So they're easier to operationalize. But to answer your question more directly, so how do you do that? So the first thing I'd say, and it's related to something you mentioned about this guy, Pete, the first thing I'd say is you look inside yourself. What are the things that you as a leader say, if I could get my people to do this more consistently, we're going to kick some butt? So there's some other questions that I think about that are helpful. One is, like your example with Pete, I often will say to a leader, what are the things that drive you crazy? There are things that when you see somebody doing that, it drives you nuts. Well, what's the opposite of that? What would they be doing if they weren't doing that thing that drives you crazy, which is like your Pete example? Another question I think about that just kind of spurs the creativity or the thinking is picture your very best people. Typically in every company, in every department, we usually have several people who we wish we could clone. Those people you say, boy, if I had 3 more guys like Joe or 2 more guys like women like Mary, this company would be amazing. Well, picture your very best people who you wish you could clone. What do they do that makes you want to clone them? Oh, you should see him. He always does, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, that's a pretty good list of behaviors. Sometimes picturing people just makes it easier for you to think about it versus it just being some abstract idea, out of your brain. Another good question I like to think about to spur the creativity or the brainstorming is think about what are the things, this sounds funny, but what are the things you go on rants about? And if you're not sure, ask the people around you. Oh, there goes Ty. He's going on one of his kicks again. You wouldn't rant about it if it wasn't important. That's why you're ranting about it. The reason, by the way, that this is so important, that what I'm describing in answer to your question, is it really goes to authenticity. It is very difficult to be a true and authentic leader of things you don't believe in, but you just heard them somewhere or saw them on a poster and it sounded really good. It just ends up being fake and inauthentic. And conversely, it's easy to be a true and authentic leader of the things you're already talking about anyway. If these are the things that are always coming out of your mouth that you're always saying to your people, well, why don't we just write those down and start teaching it to people? Bottom line is be yourself, be real, instead of trying to write some things that sound nice on a greeting card or on a poster.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people start by looking at other people's cultures, other people's behaviors, other people's values, and kind of taking a lot from there. So that's a great point. But anything a culture should have, like any culture that you've seen should have or should not have.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes. So having done this, I've done this process of helping companies through this with more than 400 different companies. So we facilitated helping lots and lots and lots of companies think of their behaviors, or again, as I call them, fundamentals. And so having done that as many times as I have, I've built a library over time of the best fundamentals I've ever seen. And not surprisingly, there's a lot of commonality. The fundamentals that would work for me are very likely 90% similar to the ones that would work for you, because companies aren't all that different. Humans are humans. You may be doing, credit, and I may be doing culture, and somebody else may be selling widgets. But you know what? We're still trying to get humans to get together and work effectively together. And 80 or 90% of it's very similar. So there are some fundamentals that I would say exist in virtually every one of our companies and should exist in every company. So to give you just a handful of typical ones, a few that I mentioned: honor commitments. If we get better about do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it, every company would be more effective if people were really rigorous about honoring their commitments. I mentioned one that I call practice blameless problem solving. Has an enormous influence over helping a company be more successful. There are a number of ones around communication, two that I teach in all of our clients. One that I call listen generously. Learning to be a good listener has an enormous impact. There's another one that I call speak straight. Speaking straight is about being crystal clear in what you're communicating and very honest, but in a way that's actually helpful, not just like dumping on people. Most companies avoid difficult conversations. If we learn to have those honest conversations, we're going to be a lot more effective. One of my favorite ones that's in every one of our clients, because it's so important, I referred to it earlier, I call it get clear on expectations. Virtually every misunderstanding between employees, with a customer, with a vendor, at home, with our spouse, at the root of it is a misunderstanding about expectations. I thought one thing, you thought something else, and that's why we're angry with each other. If we were just crystal clear up front and I had the same expectations that you had, we'd solve so many of our problems. And so learning to be really skillful about, in every conversation, in every interaction, making sure that we're on the same page and we have the same expectations has an enormous influence over effectiveness. Every company should have that in their list. So there's a bunch of ones like that that should be in every company.
Do you list some of those in your book?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And on our website, you can see a lot of those too.
I'll check that out. I did order Culture by Design, actually, where we were sitting here, the soft copy, because it's one of those ones I want to hold my hand, because these are all just exceptional points and so much stuff that I've never even thought of for culture. So I can imagine what happens when we jump in to Culture by Design, to the actual book, and see what's in there as well. What about changes? Culture change over time? How do you deal with changes? Because I imagine as the organization grows, that culture might change a little, or does it?
Well, that's an interesting question. And I would say sort of no, to a degree. And I'll explain that further. And let me preface this by saying, you made the comment that some of this you'd never thought of. My experience, having done this as much and written and spoken as much as I have about this, is that most people have that same experience, that they know culture is important, but they just never really thought about it this way before. And when I explain things, it's like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I just hadn't considered that. So as it relates to your question specifically, because it's another, oh, that makes sense, is that I suggest that when we develop our fundamentals, that we work on it with what I call an intention of permanence. And what I mean by that language, intention of permanence, is that we're going to put the effort and the thought into it that we would, expecting it to last forever. Now, I call it an intention of permanence because it's an intention. We reserve the right. If something needs to change, it's not like you're not allowed to change it, but we go into it thinking we're going to make this enduring versus thinking, hey, every couple of years, let's change around our fundamentals. Now, for those that when they hear that, they get concerned about, well, wait a second, to your point, hey, the world is changing. I mean, shouldn't we be responsive to the changing world around us? And my point of view is absolutely we should be responsive to a changing world. But that changing world causes us to change some of our product and service mix, our strategies, our go-to-market strategy, our key initiatives and priorities for this year are going to change with what's going on in our world. But that doesn't cause us to change the enduring elements of our culture. What would change in the world around us that would have us say, that honoring commitment stuff, that's outdated. We don't need to do that anymore. Or that practicing blameless problem solving. No, it's a new world. We got to start blaming people more. Now, these are foundational elements they're enduring principles about how we operate that don't change with time. I mean, I've heard of that thing called the 10 Commandments. Remember that thing? That
Mhm.
thing's lasted a few thousand years, without a lot of change to it. So these are really enduring principles that stand the test of time. It's our strategies and products and services that change.
When you've obviously helped a lot, hundreds and hundreds of organizations. What do you see are some of the main benefits they experience when they go from not having this figured out to figuring this out?
Yeah, that's a great question. They see a lot of things, Ty. Interestingly, this is sort of interesting. I recently did a survey on this question. So I did a survey like a month or two ago with all of our clients. And one of the questions I asked them is, all right, you've been doing this for a while. What are sometimes the benefits you get from doing this aren't always identical to the benefits you thought you were going to get. So what is it that you see? And I gave them about 15 things, and I looked to see I asked them, what are the top 3 benefits that you've received from working on your culture in a more intentional way? And it was interesting to see the study. The number one thing, and this is something you might not have thought of, but when I explain it, it'll make sense again. The number one thing that people actually find and talk about all the time is the power of having a common language in our company. That when we're all speaking the same language, when we all know what it means to practice blameless problem solving or to honor commitments or to get clear on expectation, when we're all using the same language, it enables us to communicate so much more effectively. It enables us to talk about the principle rather than attacking the person. We just work so much more effectively when we're all using that same phraseology. And it's something that most companies don't think about and don't anticipate, but they always say afterwards, it's one of the biggest benefits they get from working on their culture in a more intentional way. But to get to more maybe typical things that you would think of, what I hear from our clients all the time is their employees work together better. There's greater collaboration than there was before. There's reduced drama from what there was before. They're more successful at attracting the kind of people that they want to attract because they're like a magnet, and the kind of people they want see their culture and say, Jesus, I want to be part of that company. They have better retention, or said another way, lower turnover. They're more profitable. They're making more money because their people are more productive. They have better customer retention because their customers want to engage with people that live in this kind of culture. There's less drama in the company. People are more focused on being effective instead of all the ridiculous drama that happens in some companies. There's so many different ways in which it impacts them.
This has been very powerful conversation. And as we get ready to wrap up, I'm just interested to know, in a post-COVID world, is it different in culture-wise between, having a remote workforce and a traditional workforce? Is that different? And is there any tips to effectively manage a a culture with a remote workforce? Because that's kind of the new world that we're all adjusting to.
Yeah, that's an important question you're asking, Ty, because you're right. It is the new world. And I don't think any of us expect that it's going back to how it used to be. So while not everybody's going to work remotely, there are going to be a lot of hybrid environments. We've got some people working remotely, some working in the office, some are working sometimes remotely and sometimes in their office. So it's a new world. So what I would say is the principles that I teach are absolutely as applicable in a remote environment, a hybrid environment, as they are in an in-person environment. And what I would add to that is that it's even more important given that hybrid environment. Because go back to what I was saying earlier about when your company was small. And I was making the comment that when your company was small, you could get away with relying upon people seeing you every day and your example being the way they picked up the culture. Well, even when a company's bigger, whether they're big or small, if we've been relying on physical proximity, our connecting with each other, being in a room together as the primary way of driving culture, we're at the water cooler and we're talking about yesterday's football game, or we talk about a customer, or whatever. If being together physically is the primary driver of our culture, well, then we're screwed when all of a sudden we're working remotely or hybrid, because we're not together anymore. So we can't count on the vibe being passed from person to person because we're together. And so this hybrid environment or remote environment has made it even more important that we have some kind of a systematic methodology to drive our culture, and that we're not reliant simply on, people being together. One of the elements in the system that I teach is actually, it's something I created. We created a mobile app, and the mobile app is a tremendous way that people engage in their fundamental of the week in so many different ways. And that mobile app has become even more important with people working remotely, because now we got ways that we can engage with each other around our fundamentals. Again, instead of just hoping that because we're physically together, we pick it up. So what I would say, bottom line is, the impact of the remote work environment, the pandemic, the hybrid environment, is that we now need, even more than ever before, to be systematic about it instead of relying on our physical proximity.
David, powerful stuff. Where can everybody go listening, learn, or watching to be able to learn more?
Yeah, so my website is CultureWise, the word culture, W-I-S-E, culturewise.com. You can reach me at david@culturewise.com. On the website, there are lots of videos and simple explanations. Everything I do is about making it simple, making it easy to understand. So there's lots of videos on the website with great explanations. My books are Fundamentally Different and Culture by Design. They're both on Amazon. And they're in all forms, including audio versions. So if you like listening to books, you can go on Audible and you can download both Fundamentally Different and Culture by Design.
Thanks for joining us again. Appreciate you coming on.
Oh, it's totally my pleasure, Ty. Great to be with you.
So everybody listening, watching, it's interesting, going on nearly 600 episodes. I've had a chance to talk to a lot of smart people on the podcast. And once in a while, I have this episode where it's just so powerful. The insight is so powerful to me that I always get off and think the same thing. I get off and go, wow. And then I go, I can't believe I just didn't have to pay for that. I can't believe I just got that much value without even have to pay for that much value. Like, it's so insightful and it's so powerful. This is it. This is one of those rare episodes. And literally, like, the hair on my arm stands up when I say that, because that's exactly how I feel. Culture is the essential component. Being blessed enough to have a chance to grow a company to 20 million, hopefully well beyond. Culture is the number one thing, if you ask me, the number one most important thing above everything else in the organization. It defines everything. It determines the success of the organization, but it also determines the ease that you accomplish this success. Because if you have the entire team on board, the culture is established, everybody's going towards the same mission, everybody wants to be there. It's just, I can't explain the excitement and how much easier and more fun it is to be able to grow a company like that than struggling on the other side of it. So make sure you go to culturewise.com. Culturewise.com, there's a ton of stuff here, including a learning center with many different, or 4 different, all different kinds of content within these 4 different components of the learning center. And make sure you grab these 2 books, Fundamentally Different and Culture by Design. I literally ordered Culture by Design. I snuck in on my phone and ordered a paper copy while we were actually here, way cheaper than it should be. I got to talk to David about raising his prices dramatically for the value that's in there. But I literally just went and ordered the book, and I suggest you do the same thing, because if you get this one thing right, you can screw up a lot of other things and still be really successful. But if you screw this thing up, it's a really hard road to be successful, if not nearly impossible. So make sure you go to culturewise.com. Make sure you take a moment to order Fundamentally Different and Culture by Design as well, and get this one thing right so you can build an exceptional corporate culture that could be the foundation of a very, very, very successful and highly profitable business. So thanks for tuning in. Make sure you visit culturewise.com and make sure you grab both Fundamentally Different and Culture by Design. Have a great day.